Gogo ndicela yeza lokuhlamba ndisusa inkathazo wonansi inkathazo ndicela yeza lokugaba ndikhupha inkathazo wonansi inkathazo thongo lamvuma. This is one of the first songs I wrote on my album. It's called Iyeza, which means medicine. And it's a song that I normally sing to strengthen myself and to bring the ancestors closer to me in order to be able to do what I believe I was destined to do, which is to sing. So mornings are usually the best time for me to write because that's when everybody leaves the house and I'm usually left alone to think. And so I normally write in the morning. It's definitely my favorite time of the day. This is my primary school. This is where I learned A, E, I, O, U. And I learned all my ABCs all the way to Z. And this is where I played games like Izwipi and Ingeto. And this is where I got beaten by my teachers on my hand with a ruler or a stick. Sometimes they'd make us climb one of these trees and get a stick so that they can whip us. So yeah, there are a lot of great memories here. It seems like everything's weird because I'm too tall to be here right now, All my memories are from down here. I remember characters, I'll remember the fox or the rabbit or the naughty monkeys who said, badlu koko wabo, badlu koko wabo, So there's a lot of stories, but I don't remember all of them, And living in Johannesburg, it's really hard to find grandmothers who know stories these nowadays. So what I've tried to do with my daughter is I make up my own stories, and I think also the grandmothers may have done the same thing actually, depending on the situation. So sometimes if I find that my daughter and her cousins are going through something difficult, like recently they lost their grandfather, I made up a story for them about a lion who didn't know that he was a lion, or she didn't know when she was a small little lion that she's actually a lion and that she's inside there, she's actually very, very strong. And so I made up a story for them, and now every time they feel weak, I remind them that they're lions, and they get strong again. So I just make up some stories sometimes to make things simpler for the children, And I find that kids nowadays have really hard times, they experience so much more tragedy and stress. I didn't experience death until I was much, much older, but the kids now lose a lot more people in their lives, There's so many people, that are dying of HIV and AIDS. So the children are kind of losing that innocence a lot quicker, and that faith in that life is good. They lose that very, very quickly. So I think the stories are important to kind of bring back magic and imagination to the children. My mother is, I think, the one that I credit most about who I've become. It's actually a very long story about my mother because my mother passed away when I was very young, when I was about 16, and my sisters were 12 and 6, and my brother was just born. So at that time, it became very important for me to remember everything that my mother taught me. And so through my music, I've always tried to remember everything my mother has taught me and put it down, And my mother was always very, very, very passionate about words, books, and the African condition. And, she was the first person that I knew who wore African cloths and wore dashikis here in Pimville, Soweto, you know what I mean? And her friends would laugh at her and say, why are you dressed like that? We're buying clothes from this store and that store, and she was always the one who would try and engage people on a much more political level, So she definitely taught me everything that I know. And everything I do is an attempt to make my mother proud, I guess. And that's kept me out of trouble many times. Not all the time, but many times. So, yeah. And my mother, passed away at a very young age. I'm 34 now, and when my mother passed away, she was my age. So I've always visualized a very young and energetic mother. So yeah, that's basically the role that my mother played in my life. She introduced me to the words of Shakespeare, the words of Chinua Achebe. She introduced me to the words of Frantz Fanon. She introduced me to Bessie Head. She introduced me to films. I watched some of my all-time favorite films I watched with my mother, films like The Unbearable Likeness of Being and Born on the 4th of July was the last movie I saw with my mother. And we saw my all-time favorite film I saw with my mother, which is called Cinema Paradiso. We used to see plays together. We saw a play together called Curl Up and Die. And they had videos of one of my all-time favorite South African plays called Asina Mali. So she was extremely cultured as well as fresh and young and just a really awesome human being. Anybody who knew her just thought she was one of the finest people they ever knew, Joburg City is a city of migrant laborers. It was built by migrant laborers. And I guess even till today, there's a lot of migrant laborers, people from Zimbabwe and Malawi, people from corners of South Africa. So that's my legacy. And that's, I guess, some of the things that I talk about in my music. It's kind of become impossible to ignore, that this is really who I am. And I have to think about finding ways to emancipate myself and to emancipate the coming generations. And for me, the first step, I guess, was to decolonize my mind. I grew up very much within the ideas of black consciousness. So when I was growing up, I read a lot of Frantz Fanon, and as I said, I read books like Decolonizing the Mind and The Wretched of the Earth. So it's always been really important for me to not only be free, but to feel free. I think as South Africans, we always say that we're free, but I think it's a lot harder to be free. So in my work, I try and find ways to make towards my freedom. And so I always look at the city in two ways. It represents my freedom, but it also, I guess, represents all the things that my oppression, the legacy of my oppression. That's essentially what my work is about. It's about finding a way through this freedom, because I find that freedom is quite a restless place, I think oppression was a lot easier because I knew what I was in oppression and what I didn't want to be. But freedom is a lot more tricky because I have to be the one that defines it. I have to be the one that breaks it down. And it's a lot more restless, I think, because of my expectations of what I thought freedom would be. And so instead of being comfortable in my freedom, I find myself quite fidgety, trying to understand it, trying to break it down, trying to make it into what my vision was of this freedom. I was born in 1976, which was the year of the Great Soweto Uprising. And so I've always felt like a a child of the rebellion, that I had the rebellion in my blood in a way. And growing up with the kind of parents that I had, both my parents were journalists. My father was writing for the Sowetan, and he became the editor of the Sowetan after some time. My mother wrote for something called The World at the time. I was always taught to be very much aware of my condition as a black person in South Africa, and also the greater African condition. Once I got to university and I studied politics and literature there. I think it became much more interesting to me once I saw how the rest of the world operated with Africa and how Africa operated with the world. And music just became a really, I guess, an easy way for me to engage some of the political ideas that I had in a way that wasn't so intense, and in a way that I think people were much more susceptible to engaging, you know. Our work has always been about identity. Because I think for me that had always been the one thing that I needed to reclaim was my identity. I felt that the apartheid system had taken so much away from me in terms of my identity and my language, that I felt that in order for me to be truly free, I had to reclaim a lot of my identity. And so my work has always been about that, about re-identifying myself, and about reconnecting with an ancient identity as well. I think this is what's always like driven me, you know, is things like this, you know, that read to honor the youth who gave their lives in the struggle for freedom and democracy. You know, I always think about those people who gave their lives for this freedom, and how important it is for me to guard it, you know, because lives were lost and blood was spilled for me to have this freedom.